The daughter of a millionaire sank her teeth into the maid's hand. But what happened next would shatter the silence of a Boston mansion and awaken a father's broken heart. If stories of healing, redemption, and unexpected family move your soul, please like and subscribe so you can follow this journey until the very last chapter. The Anderson mansion on Beacon Hill had stood for over a century, its mahogany staircases and stained glass windows echoing with the whispers of generations. To the world, Jonathan Anderson, widower and venture capital magnate, possessed everything: wealth beyond measure, influence in Boston's financial circles, and a sprawling manor that crowned the historic neighborhood. Yet behind the iron gates, the house was haunted by silence. Since the death of his wife, the only sound Jonathan heard at night was the uneven breathing of his daughter, Emma, from across the hall. Emma Anderson was 7 years old and had not spoken a single word since her mother's funeral 2 years ago. Doctors had confirmed she was on the autism spectrum, though her silence was as much grief as diagnosis. She wandered the manor's hallways like a ghost, rigid routines, lowered eyes, hands gripping toy trains until her knuckles whitened. Therapists came and went, each armed with credentials from Harvard or Yale, yet none could pierce the walls Emma built around herself. On a gray November morning, Jonathan approved the hiring of a new maid. She was not from an agency. She had walked to the service entrance, resume in hand, her shoes worn thin from years of waitressing and cleaning apartments in Dorchester. Her name was Clara Miller, 22, with earnest brown eyes and a quiet strength in her voice. The household staff exchanged glances when Jonathan unexpectedly agreed to let her stay. Perhaps, they whispered, it was her calmness that convinced him, something softer than the polished perfection of those before her. Clara's first day began with polishing the grand banister in the front hall. Sunlight seeped through the tall windows, glinting off portraits of stern Anderson ancestors. She hummed under her breath, an old lullaby her mother used to sing, the sound oddly comforting in a house where no music had played for years. Then she felt it, a sudden sharp pain in her hand. She gasped, looking down. Emma stood before her, her small teeth sunk into Clara's flesh, her face twisted in fear and fury. Blood welled instantly. The entire staff froze. A crystal vase nearly toppled as the butler rushed forward. "Step away from her!" he barked, panic lacing his tone. But Clara did not move. Instead, she crouched down to the girl's level, her injured hand trembling yet steady. She didn't scold, didn't pull away. Her other arm slowly encircled Emma, drawing her close despite the sting of the wound. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice low and steady, the way one might soothe a trembling animal. "You don't have to be afraid. You're safe." For the first time in 2 long years, something inside Emma cracked. Her body shuddered, her lips parted, and then, like floodgates breaking, tears streamed down her face. The girl sobbed into Clara's chest, her cries echoing through the cavernous hall, raw and startling. From the staircase above, Jonathan Anderson stood frozen. He had come down only to retrieve a file before his meeting at the Prudential Tower, but what he witnessed arrested his breath. He had not seen his daughter cry, not once, since his wife's casket was lowered into the ground at Mount Auburn Cemetery. The sound now cut through him like lightning. Every servant in the hall stared in disbelief. Some whispered prayers, others held their hands to their mouths. Yet it was Jonathan whose world tilted on its axis. For 2 years, he had spent fortunes on experts, flown in specialists, built therapy rooms lined with sensory toys, all in vain. Now, in a single moment, a young maid from Dorchester, with no letters after her name, had broken through to his daughter with nothing more than patience and a whispered lullaby. Jonathan's grip tightened on the polished railing. His chest ached with something he had buried under stock portfolios and board meetings. Hope. Hope was dangerous, he reminded himself. But as he watched Emma weep in Clara's arms, he could no longer deny it. Something was stirring. Something alive. Clara continued to hold the child, rocking gently. She didn't flinch as blood dripped from her hand onto the marble floor. She ignored the horrified looks of the staff, ignored the ache in her wrist. All she saw was a girl drowning in silence, now gasping for breath at last. "Shh," she murmured, smoothing Emma's hair. "You don't have to be alone anymore." The girl clung to her tighter. Jonathan descended the staircase slowly, each step heavy with disbelief. His eyes, once clouded by grief, burned with new intensity as they fell upon Clara. For the first time in years, he dared to wonder, could this be the beginning of something neither wealth nor power had managed to buy? A chance to bring his daughter back from the shadows? By the time the housekeeper brought bandages, the entire mansion had changed. It wasn't in its walls or chandeliers, but in the air, alive now with a child's tears, with a father's breaking silence, with the presence of a stranger who refused to let go. Jonathan dismissed his meeting at the tower that day. Instead, he lingered in the grand hall, silent, watching Clara and Emma on the rug beneath the portraits. The staff whispered in corners, too shaken to return to their chores. Outside, the bells of Park Street Church rang noon, their chimes carried by the cold Boston wind. But inside the Anderson Manor, another sound had risen, fragile yet unstoppable, the first crack in the silence of a grieving house. The day after the incident in the Great Hall, the Anderson mansion seemed different. Servants polished the banisters with less chatter, cooks moved quietly in the kitchen, and the butler, usually a stern man of rigid discipline, spoke more softly than usual. Something had shifted. For the first time in 2 years, Emma had cried. Clara Miller woke early, long before the rest of the staff. She sat in her small room on the 3rd floor, bandage wrapped around her hand, staring at the dawn light filtering through lace curtains. The bite still stung, but she didn't mind. What remained in her mind wasn't pain. It was the feel of a girl's heartbeat pounding against her chest as she wept. She thought of her own childhood in Dorchester, the noise of the apartment walls so thin she could hear every argument next door. Her mother had worked 2 jobs, leaving Clara to babysit her younger siblings. When one of them would throw tantrums, screaming, thrashing, Clara had learned something doctors never taught. Words were not always the answer. Sometimes it was presence, sometimes patience, sometimes just being a steady anchor in the storm. That morning, she took colored paper from the supply closet and sat cross-legged on the floor. With crayons borrowed from the cook's children, she began to draw. A bright red heart, a yellow smiley face, a blue frown, a little brown house. Each picture she cut into squares, making a deck of simple flashcards. It was crude compared to the glossy professional kits she had seen therapists carry, but she poured into it the same care she once gave her siblings, an offering of hope. When she entered Emma's room after breakfast, the girl sat rigid at her desk, lining up toy trains with military precision. Her face was blank, eyes fixed on the tracks. The nurse assigned to watch her tried to intervene. "Mr. Anderson prefers the therapy schedule remain unchanged," she reminded Clara, her tone clipped. Clara only nodded, then knelt beside the child. She placed the flashcards gently on the carpet. One by one, she spread them out. Heart, smile, frown, house. Emma's eyes flickered. Her hand trembled, hovering. For a moment, Clara worried she had pushed too far. But then, slowly, deliberately, Emma picked up the red heart and held it to her chest. Clara smiled, tears threatening to spill. "That's right," she whispered. "Love." She pressed her own hand to her heart. "Safe." The girl's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Closer than Jonathan Anderson or any therapist had seen in years. Unbeknownst to Clara, Jonathan stood in the doorway. He had meant to enter silently, to check on his daughter before leaving for the office. But when he saw Emma clutch the heart card, his throat tightened. He remained still, unwilling to disturb the fragile magic unfolding. Later that afternoon, Jonathan summoned the household to the drawing room. Clara stood awkwardly at the back as he introduced a guest, Dr. Melissa Carter, a rising star from Harvard Medical School's Department of Psychiatry. Young, sharp, impeccably dressed, Melissa had been consulting part-time but now proposed a full treatment plan for Emma. Melissa spoke with confidence, flipping through charts. Applied behavioral analysis, structured schedules, stimulus-response therapy, all of these are proven methods. Progress is slow, incremental, but lasting. Her gaze slid to Clara, just for a second, before turning back to Jonathan. Quick breakthroughs, however dramatic they may seem, are rarely reliable. Jonathan's brow furrowed. Breakthrough? Melissa gestured subtly toward Emma, who sat nearby with the flashcard clutched in her hand. Yes, I understand there was an incident. Crying, sudden engagement with improvised tools. We must be cautious, Mr. Anderson. Genuine progress takes months, even years. What you witnessed may be nothing more than a fleeting reaction, easily misinterpreted. A chill swept through the room. The staff exchanged glances. Clara lowered her eyes, gripping her bandaged hand. Jonathan said nothing, but his jaw tightened. He dismissed the meeting quickly, retreating to his study. Melissa lingered behind, whispering to the butler and the cook as though planting seeds of reason or suspicion. That evening, Clara returned to her small room, shaken. She replayed Melissa's words in her mind, fleeting, misinterpreted, unreliable. Was it foolish to believe a simple deck of flashcards could matter? She doubted herself, yet the memory of Emma clutching the heart burned too brightly to dismiss. The next morning, Clara found Emma waiting for her. She was seated on the rug, flashcards spread around her like treasure. When Clara entered, Emma lifted the heart again, her eyes meeting Clara's with a quiet certainty. Her doubts dissolved. Whatever others might say, this was real. She sat down beside the child, whispering, "We'll keep going, just you and me." But across the hall, behind the half-open door of the study, Melissa Carter watched, her eyes cool and calculating. The Anderson mansion, with its marble floors and antique chandeliers, had always run on discipline. Every servant, from the head butler to the scullery maid, understood their duties. Yet in the weeks following Clara's arrival, whispers began curling like smoke through the halls. At first, they were harmless. A laugh at Clara's accent from Dorchester. A raised eyebrow at her plain dresses. But then Dr. Melissa Carter began to visit more frequently, her sleek car gliding into the driveway like a predator circling prey. She would arrive with binders of data, charts, and polished lectures, her eyes always sharp and searching. Melissa had the pedigree. Harvard, publications in journals with long Latin names, a fellowship in neurodevelopmental disorders. To the staff, she carried an aura of untouchable authority. Compared to her, Clara was nothing more than a maid with paper flashcards. One afternoon, Melissa lingered in the kitchen after her session with Emma. The cook was kneading dough for the evening's bread, and the housekeeper was arranging linens. Melissa leaned casually against the counter, her voice sweet as honey. "Such a shame," she said, tracing her manicured nail along the edge of a mixing bowl. "Jonathan is so vulnerable right now. A widower, grieving, desperate for hope. People like, well, outsiders, could easily take advantage of him." The cook frowned. "You mean Clara?" Melissa tilted her head, feigning reluctance. "I wouldn't dare suggest anything improper. But don't you find it unusual? A young, pretty maid suddenly having such influence? And Mr. Anderson, a man of his stature, watching her so closely." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. You know how gossip spreads in Boston society. It could tarnish the family name. By the time Melissa left, the seeds were planted. The butler pursed his lips when Clara passed him in the hall. The housekeeper's greetings grew curt. Even the gardener, once friendly, now avoided her eyes. Clara sensed the change like a draft slipping under a door, subtle but chilling. Meanwhile, Melissa was not content with quiet whispers. She had ambitions that reached beyond the Anderson manor. At the offices of the Anderson Foundation, Jonathan's philanthropic arm, she began cultivating relationships with the board. Over polished lunches in Back Bay cafes, she spoke of her groundbreaking methods, the possibility of publishing Emma's case as a study that could revolutionize autism therapy. "Imagine the headlines," she told one trustee. "The Anderson Foundation funds the breakthrough that restores communication to a silent child." It would elevate Jonathan's legacy, and mine, of course, to new heights. When asked about Clara, Melissa smiled delicately. "Sweet girl, but no formal training. I worry she may cause more harm than good. We must be vigilant for Emma's sake." Back at the manor, Clara continued her quiet work. She didn't know about the boardroom lunches or the carefully curated rumors. What she did notice were the small, piercing looks from the staff, the way conversations stopped when she entered a room. One evening, as she carried laundry through the hall, the butler stopped her. His tone was unusually cold. "Miss Miller, a word of advice. This is not Dorchester. Families like the Andersons guard their reputation fiercely. Best not to overstep." Clara swallowed her protest, nodding silently. She knew what he meant. She also knew she had done nothing wrong, yet shame burned hot in her chest. Later, she sat on the floor of Emma's room as the girl arranged her flashcards into neat rows. Emma handed Clara the house card, tapping it twice with her finger. Clara smiled, even through her unease. "Yes, house, safe." Emma looked at her with eyes both vulnerable and searching. She placed the heart card beside the house and pushed them toward Clara. Her throat tightened. "Home is love," she was trying to say. At that moment, Jonathan entered. He carried himself with his usual composure, but Clara caught the flicker of hesitation in his gaze, as though Melissa's words had reached him too. He watched as Emma nestled closer to Clara, the girl's head resting against her shoulder. For a heartbeat, Jonathan's expression softened, but then it hardened again. He cleared his throat. "Clara, may I speak with you later in my study?" She nodded, nerves prickling. That night, in the dim light of the study, Jonathan closed the door behind them. "I've been hearing concerns," he began, his tone measured. "Some believe you're overstepping your role, that Emma's progress, while encouraging, may not be sustainable without professional oversight." Clara's hands trembled against her apron. "Mr. Anderson, I never claimed to replace doctors. I only wanted to reach her in ways that felt human." Jonathan studied her, his face unreadable. "I want to believe you, Clara. God knows I've seen my daughter respond to you in ways I thought impossible. But understand, my responsibility is not just to her, but to the entire Anderson legacy. If your methods prove reckless—" He trailed off, the implication heavy. Clara left the study that night with her heart weighed down. She knew Melissa's shadow loomed behind every word Jonathan spoke, and though Emma's trust in her grew stronger each day, Clara could feel the mansion turning against her. What she didn't know, what no one yet realized, was that Melissa was already planning her next move, a scheme far darker than whispers. The Anderson mansion on Beacon Hill was never quiet for long. There was always the sound of footsteps on marble, the clink of silver in the dining hall, the occasional slam of a heavy oak door. But Emma's cries were different. They cut through the house like jagged glass, urgent and raw. It began on a damp Tuesday morning. Clara climbed the sweeping staircase with a tray of breakfast, oatmeal sweetened with honey, sliced strawberries on the side. When she entered Emma's room, she noticed at once the rug where the flashcards always lay was bare. Emma was already searching, overturning drawers, scattering toy trains across the floor in her frantic hunt. Her eyes darted wildly, her breath shallow. "Where are they?" Clara whispered, setting the tray aside. "Emma, your cards. Did you move them?" The girl shook her head violently, fists clenching. She sprinted to the closet, pulling at boxes, tearing clothes from hangers. Clara knelt, heart pounding. "We'll find them. Don't worry." But Emma's panic only grew. She began hitting the wall with her small fists, then slammed her forehead against the plaster. "No, no, no." Clara rushed forward, wrapping her arms around her. "Stop, sweetheart. You're safe." She shrieked, thrashing against Clara, her body trembling as if the loss of those cards had ripped the ground out from under her. Her cries echoed down the hall. Servants came running. The butler hovered in the doorway, his face pale. Behind him stood Dr. Melissa Carter, who just happened to be in the house for her scheduled session. Her lips curved into a knowing smile as she surveyed the scene. "What happened here?" she asked smoothly. "The cards," Clara stammered, holding Emma tightly. "The ones I made for her. They're gone." Melissa raised her eyebrows, feigning concern. "Gone? How strange. Children with autism thrive on consistency. To remove a tool so suddenly—" She let her voice trail off, then gave a small shake of her head. "Clara, perhaps your improvisations have done more harm than good." Clara flushed with anger. "I never—" But Jonathan Anderson appeared behind them, drawn by the sound of his daughter's meltdown. He froze at the sight. Clara on the floor, clutching a screaming Emma, Melissa standing poised like a physician diagnosing the scene. Melissa turned to him with a look of practiced sympathy. "Mr. Anderson, I warned you. These shortcuts, flashcards without clinical oversight, can destabilize progress. This episode may be evidence of that." Jonathan's jaw tightened. His gaze swept over Clara, then back to his daughter. Doubt flickered in his eyes. Emma wailed louder, slamming her head against Clara's shoulder. Clara whispered desperately, "She needs the cards. She trusts them." But Melissa's voice cut through. "Or perhaps she trusts chaos. Some individuals manipulate caregivers with tantrums to gain control. It's textbook." Jonathan hesitated. The room seemed to tilt. Whom should he believe? The young maid with her bleeding compassion, or the Harvard-trained doctor with charts and polished arguments? Later that day, as Emma lay exhausted in bed, Clara searched every corner of the house. She checked under furniture, behind curtains, in closets. Nothing. The flashcards had vanished. Downstairs in the library, Melissa sat alone. From her leather bag, she pulled a crumpled envelope. Inside were the flashcards, creased, hidden from sight. She smoothed the heart card with her fingers, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. That evening, Jonathan called Clara to his study. The fire crackled in the hearth as he poured himself a glass of scotch. His eyes were heavy, his voice low. "Clara," he said, "Emma's episode this morning was severe. Melissa believes it was triggered by dependency on unstable tools. She suggests we phase out the flashcards altogether." Clara's breath caught. "No, Mr. Anderson. That's not what happened. Someone took them. Emma isn't dependent. She's learning. She was terrified because they disappeared without reason." Jonathan studied her. His face was carved with conflict, the grief of a father desperate to protect his child but unsure whom to trust. "You're asking me to believe the cards were stolen?" Clara's throat tightened. She knew how it sounded. a maid accusing shadows. No proof, only her certainty. "I don't know who," she whispered, "but Emma is telling us something in the only way she can. We must listen." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, weary. "I want to, Clara. God knows I want to. But Melissa has experience, data. And you?" His voice trailed off, the unspoken words hanging heavy. "You are just a maid." Clara blinked back tears, standing in silence. As she left the study, she heard Emma stir upstairs, her small voice breaking into a sob. The sound splintered Clara's heart. She knew she was being pushed into the margins, her connection to Emma questioned, her intentions doubted. But deep inside, she also knew the truth. The cards had not vanished by chance. Someone wanted her gone. The Anderson mansion glittered with the cold sheen of old money. Crystal chandeliers swayed above velvet drapes, marble staircases wound like frozen rivers, and every room bore the silent weight of generations. But beneath the grandeur, suspicion was tightening like a noose. Clara Miller felt it every day, stares from the staff, whispers trailing after she passed, Jonathan's cool glances that once held a flicker of trust, but now brimmed with doubt. Emma clung to her more than ever, hiding behind her skirts, pressing flashcards drawn on scraps of new paper she had secretly remade. Yet Clara sensed her time was running out. Melissa Carter was ready to strike. The trap was set on a rain-soaked Friday evening. The household was preparing for a small dinner reception. 3 trustees of the Anderson Foundation were coming to discuss new funding initiatives. Jonathan had instructed the staff to prepare the drawing room with Anderson family heirlooms on display, silverware, portraits, and a velvet-lined box containing the jewelry of his late wife, Margaret. Inside the box lay a delicate diamond bracelet, the last gift Jonathan had ever given his wife before her illness consumed her. To him it was sacred, an emblem of grief and memory. Melissa knew this. That afternoon, she slipped quietly into Clara's quarters under the guise of checking on staff welfare. Her eyes landed on the laundry basket by the wardrobe. With surgical precision, she tucked the bracelet deep inside the folded linens. Her lips curved into a smile. By dusk, the storm outside battered the windows as guests arrived. Clara carried trays of hors d'oeuvres through the hall, her bandaged hand steady despite the rising tension in the room. She felt Melissa's gaze following her like a shadow. Then came the cry. "Mr. Anderson!" The butler's voice rang through the drawing room. "The bracelet! It's missing!" The room froze. Jonathan spun around, eyes blazing. "What?" "The bracelet," the butler repeated, pale. "It was in the box this afternoon. Now it's gone." Melissa stepped forward, her voice calm but cutting. "Perhaps it should be checked whether any staff may have misplaced it." Her eyes flicked toward Clara. Jonathan's gaze followed. "Search her room," he ordered. Minutes later, the staff returned carrying Clara's laundry basket. Gasps rippled through the room as the diamond bracelet was pulled from the folds. Clara staggered back, color draining from her face. "No, I swear, I don't know how—" Jonathan's expression hardened into something Clara had never seen before. His voice thundered, echoing off the paneled walls. "You dare steal from me? From my wife's memory?" Tears welled in Clara's eyes. "I didn't. Someone put it there. Please, you must believe me." Melissa interjected smoothly. "Mr. Anderson, grief can make people reckless." Perhaps she thought you'd be too distracted to notice. Jonathan raised a hand, silencing her but not denying the accusation. His chest heaved with fury, his eyes fixed on Clara. "Pack your things. You're finished here." The staff looked away, some ashamed, others triumphant. Melissa's lips curled in satisfaction. Clara's hands shook as she tried one last plea. "Check the cameras," she whispered desperately. "The security system, you'll see it wasn't me." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "The footage has already been reviewed. Nothing shows anyone but you near that box." Clara froze. She understood then. Melissa had covered her tracks. The footage had been tampered with. With no defense left, Clara gathered her few belongings and walked toward the door. Emma, sensing abandonment, sprinted across the marble floor. She pounded her small fists against the glass as Clara stepped outside into the storm. "Clara!" Her cry pierced the night, muffled by the rain and the heavy door. Her face pressed against the window, tears streaking down her cheeks. Clara turned, rain plastering her hair to her face. For one agonizing moment, her eyes met Jonathan's through the glass. His hand hovered at his side, trembling as if he might call her back. But he didn't. The door closed with a thud that reverberated through the empty hall. Inside, Emma collapsed to the floor, sobbing, the sound echoing through the manor like a lament. Jonathan stood rigid, fists clenched, yet his eyes betrayed something deeper than anger. Fear. Fear that he had made a mistake too grave to undo. Melissa stood quietly in the corner, watching the storm rage outside. In her eyes, victory glittered like diamonds. The Anderson mansion had grown silent again, but it was not the peaceful silence of order. It was the hollow quiet of absence. Clara was gone, dismissed in disgrace, and her absence clung to every corner of the house like a shadow. Jonathan noticed first in his child. Emma had once resisted therapists and staff with stubborn indifference, but now she resisted everything: food, sleep, even the toys she once arranged with mechanical precision. She sat on the rug in her bedroom, her small frame hunched, crayons scattered around her like fallen soldiers. Jonathan returned home late one night after a board meeting and stopped outside his daughter's door. The light seeped from the crack, dim but steady. Pushing the door open, he froze. The floor was covered in drawings. Dozens of crumpled sheets lay scattered, each filled with frantic sketches. They were not childish doodles, but obsessive repetitions of the same scene: a woman holding cards behind her back. The figure always had the same shape: long hair, narrow shoulders, and always a pair of square glasses perched on her nose. Jonathan's blood ran cold. Glasses. Melissa. He stepped carefully into the room, kneeling beside one of the drawings. Emma looked up at him, her eyes swollen from sleeplessness. Without a word, the girl shoved another paper into Jonathan's hand. On it, the same figure stood behind a child, concealing the familiar flashcards. "Did she do this?" Jonathan whispered, his throat dry. "Melissa?" Emma tapped the page twice, then curled into herself, rocking. Jonathan's chest tightened. For weeks he had defended Melissa, had allowed her polished credentials to outweigh Clara's sincerity. But here was his daughter, communicating in the only way she knew how, through desperate drawings littering the floor. The following day, Jonathan took action. While Melissa was in session with Emma, he slipped quietly to the garage. Her sleek black Lexus sat gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He opened the back door, heart pounding, and began searching. Under the seat, nothing. In the glove compartment, only papers and mints. But then, beneath the floor mat, his fingers brushed something rough. He pulled it out. A bundle of paper, torn, edges frayed. He unrolled it slowly. Clara's flashcards. Crumpled, smeared, but unmistakable. The red heart, the smiley face, the blue frown. Jonathan's hands trembled. Rage surged through him, but beneath the fury was shame. Shame for doubting Clara, for allowing Melissa to weave lies unchecked, for failing his daughter when she needed him most. That evening, Melissa breezed into the study with her usual poise. "Mr. Anderson," she began, "Emma is still showing resistance." I recommend we increase the intensity of her sessions. More structure, less indulgence. Jonathan said nothing. He opened a drawer and placed the crumpled flashcards on the desk between them. Melissa's words faltered. Her eyes flicked to the cards, then back to Jonathan. "Interesting," she said finally, her voice too calm. "Where did you find those?" "In your car," Jonathan replied, his voice low but edged with steel. "Hidden under the mat." Melissa's mask cracked for only a moment, a flash of alarm before she smoothed it into composure. "You must be mistaken. Anyone could have—" "Stop!" Jonathan's voice thundered through the study. "No more lies." He slammed his fist on the desk, the sound rattling the crystal decanter. "You manipulated my staff. You framed Clara. And worst of all, you tormented my daughter." Melissa's lips pressed into a thin line. "You have no proof that will stand in court. What will the board say, Jonathan, when you accuse a Harvard physician with nothing but a child's scribbles and your suspicions?" Jonathan leaned forward, eyes blazing. "Then I'll get proof. Real proof. And when I do, you won't just lose your position here. You'll lose everything." Melissa's composure faltered again, but she recovered quickly, gathering her briefcase. "Be careful, Mr. Anderson. Accusations without evidence can destroy reputations, even yours." When she swept out of the study, Jonathan collapsed into his chair, running his hands over his face. For the first time in years, he felt something stronger than grief, resolve. He looked at the crumpled flashcards on the desk, then at the drawings his daughter had left on the floor. Emma had spoken, not with words, but with images, desperate pleas for someone to believe her. Jonathan whispered into the empty room, "I hear you, sweetheart. I hear you now." Jonathan Anderson had built his fortune on two principles: precision and proof. He had learned long ago in the world of venture capital that suspicion without evidence was nothing more than gossip. Now, standing in his study with the crumpled flashcards spread across his desk, he realized he had allowed Melissa Carter to manipulate him because he had lacked both. That mistake had cost Clara her place in the house and had nearly broken his daughter. He wouldn't make the same mistake again. The next morning, while Melissa conducted her therapy session with Emma, Jonathan called a discreet security firm from Cambridge. By evening, technicians were in the mansion under the guise of updating the alarm system. In reality, they installed a network of hidden cameras, tiny black eyes tucked into corners of the therapy room, behind books on shelves, even in the decorative molding above the fireplace. Jonathan gave them one instruction: record everything. For 3 days he waited, restless, his mind heavy with guilt and anticipation. Each evening he reviewed hours of footage, hoping for a crack in Melissa's polished mask. At first, nothing. Melissa kept her voice level, her hands calm, her demeanor flawless. She smiled at Emma, held up charts, coaxed her with structured commands. But on the 4th day, the mask slipped. The footage showed Emma resisting her instructions, shaking her head and covering her ears. Melissa's smile hardened. She leaned down, gripping the child's wrists too tightly. Jonathan leaned forward in his study, his knuckles white as he watched. "On the recording," Melissa hissed, her voice low but sharp, "if you were normal, your father would love you. Do you understand that? He wouldn't look at that maid, he would look at you. But you're broken." Emma whimpered, trying to pull away. Melissa's hand clamped harder, leaving white marks on her skin. Jonathan slammed his fist against the desk. The rage that surged through him was like fire, but it was the sorrow that nearly brought him to his knees. For years he had feared Emma's silence meant she had no awareness of love or rejection. But watching his daughter flinch under Melissa's cruelty, Jonathan realized the truth. Emma felt everything. She just couldn't speak it. Jonathan called his attorney that same night. I want this documented, he ordered, his voice shaking with fury. Every second of it. I want her charged with child abuse, with professional misconduct, with falsifying evidence. The attorney hesitated. Jonathan, these are serious allegations. Are you certain the footage will stand up? Jonathan sent the file immediately. See for yourself. She's finished. The next morning, he called the Boston Police Department. 2 detectives arrived discreetly, their presence explained to the staff as routine estate security checks. Jonathan led them to his study where he played the footage. As Melissa's words filled the room, the detectives' expressions darkened. This is enough to open a case, one said. We'll need to interview the staff, collect corroborating evidence. But yes, this is damning. Jonathan exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Then do it! I don't care what it costs. She will not harm my daughter again. Word spread quickly through the household. First in whispers, then in gasps of disbelief. The butler who had once sneered at Clara now hung his head in shame. The cook who had doubted her muttered prayers of apology. Even the housekeeper wiped her eyes, remembering the day Clara left under accusation. That evening, Jonathan sat with Emma in her room. The girl was hunched over a sketch pad, drawing in her familiar, urgent style. When Jonathan sat beside her, Emma looked up with guarded eyes. Jonathan placed a hand gently on his daughter's shoulder. I'm sorry, he whispered. I should have listened to you. I should have believed her. But I promise you this ends now. Emma hesitated, then slid the drawing toward him. It showed 3 figures, a tall man, a girl, and a woman holding a red heart card. For the first time, Jonathan let himself cry in front of his child. Clara, he whispered. We'll bring her back. The following day, Melissa entered the mansion with her usual poise, briefcase in hand. She didn't notice the detectives waiting in the foyer until Jonathan stepped forward, his voice like steel. Dr. Carter, he said, your services are no longer required. Melissa's eyes narrowed. Jonathan, surely... The detective cut her off. Melissa Carter, you are under investigation for child abuse and falsification of evidence. You'll need to come with us. Gasps echoed through the hall. Staff members emerged from doorways, watching as Melissa's composure cracked. Her face flushed, her voice trembled. This is absurd! I am Harvard-trained! Jonathan's voice thundered, cold and final. And you use that to hurt my daughter. Credentials don't excuse cruelty. As the detectives led her out, Emma appeared at the top of the staircase, watching. Melissa turned her gaze upward, perhaps expecting fear, but the girl only stared back silently, her small frame steady, her eyes clear. For the first time, Jonathan saw strength in his daughter's gaze, not just fragility, but resilience. And deep inside, he felt the flicker of something stronger than rage. Hope. The news broke on a crisp November morning. Harvard therapist arrested for child abuse in Beacon Hill Mansion. The headline blared across the Boston Globe, echoed by local television and even national outlets by noon. Photographers crowded outside the iron gates of the Anderson estate, their flashes bursting against the stone walls like summer lightning. Inside, Jonathan Anderson sat in his study, his daughter curled silently in his lap. The world finally knew the truth, but victory felt hollow without Clara. He had watched Emma deteriorate after Clara's departure, refusing meals, refusing rest, filling the floor with desperate drawings until Jonathan finally understood. Clara had been her lifeline, the one presence she trusted. And Jonathan had cast her out. That afternoon, Jonathan made a decision. He left the safety of his mahogany-paneled study, walked past the waiting reporters without a word, and climbed into his car. Instead of heading downtown to his office, He drove across the Charles River, past the glittering towers, into Dorchester, the neighborhood Clara had once spoken of with both pride and pain. The streets were narrow, lined with aging triple-decker houses. Children played on cracked sidewalks, their laughter echoing between graffiti-stained walls. Jonathan parked his sleek black sedan awkwardly among dented cars and broken curbs. He stepped out, his polished shoes splashing in shallow puddles. People stared. It was not every day that a Beacon Hill millionaire appeared on their block, tailored coat and all. Whispers rose, skeptical and sharp. Jonathan spotted her. Clara Miller stood outside a faded apartment building. A grocery bag balanced on her hip, her hair pulled back in a loose braid. She looked thinner, wearier, but her eyes were the same, earnest, steady, carrying more strength than anyone her age should bear. "Clara," he said, his voice cracking. She turned, startled, nearly dropping the bag. When she saw him, her face hardened. "Mr. Anderson, what are you doing here?" Jonathan hesitated. Words had always been his weapons, in boardrooms, in negotiations, but now they failed him. His throat tightened. "I came to apologize." The neighbors paused their chatter. A man fixing a bicycle looked up, eyes widening. Children stopped bouncing their basketball, watching the scene unfold. Jonathan took a step closer, his voice breaking. "I accused you of something you didn't do. I let lies blind me. I hurt you. I hurt my daughter. And I am sorry, not as an employer, not as a millionaire, but as a father who failed to protect his girl." Clara's grocery bag slipped slightly in her arms. She blinked rapidly, stunned by the sight of a man the city called ruthless, now standing humbled before her, words trembling. "You don't need to say this here," she whispered, glancing around at the growing crowd. "Yes, I do," Jonathan said firmly, dropping to his knees right there on the cracked pavement. Gasps rippled through the neighbors. "You deserve this apology in front of everyone. Because I wronged you in front of everyone who mattered in my world. And my daughter." His voice faltered. "She hasn't stopped calling for you." From the back seat of the sedan came a sound that silenced the block, the creak of a car door, followed by small footsteps. Emma appeared, clutching a red heart card Clara had made from scrap paper. She ran across the street, stumbling, tears already streaming down her cheeks. "Clara!" The word rang clear. Fragile, but undeniable. The first word Emma had spoken in 2 years. Clara's eyes filled with tears as the child hurled herself into her arms, sobbing against her shoulder. She dropped the groceries, clutching Emma tightly, her own heart breaking open. The neighbors gasped, some covering their mouths, others wiping their eyes. In that moment, there were no divides between Beacon Hill and Dorchester, between wealth and poverty, only the raw, healing cry of a child who had found her voice again. Jonathan rose slowly from his knees, his eyes wet. "Please," he said softly, "come back. Not as a maid, not as staff. Come back as Emma's family." As mine." Clara looked at him, her arms still around the girl. Her heart pounded with the memory of humiliation, of being cast out like a thief. But Emma's voice, her trembling cry of Clara's name, washed away the bitterness. She nodded through her tears. "I'll come back. For her." The crowd erupted in applause, not the polite kind of charity galas, but the raw, human clapping of neighbors who had just witnessed something rare. A man of power humbled, a broken child healed, and a young woman vindicated. News cameras caught it all. That evening, footage of Emma calling Clara's name replayed across Boston's evening broadcasts. The city, weary from scandals of greed and corruption, found hope in a story of humility and healing. In Beacon Hill, the mansion's heavy silence would soon be broken, not by whispers of suspicion, but by the sound of a child beginning to laugh again. When Clara returned to the Anderson mansion, the air felt different. The grand chandeliers still glittered, the mahogany staircases still gleamed, but the house no longer carried the weight of suspicion. For the first time in years, the mansion breathed with something new: warmth. Emma was the first to transform. With Clara at her side, she ate again, slept more peacefully, and even ventured outside the tall gates into the gardens. Each day, Clara worked with her, using the language of trust she had built. Simple flashcards, gentle encouragement, and the patient rhythm of love. Jonathan watched from the study window as Emma ran across the grass one afternoon, holding up a flashcard she had drawn herself, a sun with uneven rays. Clara clapped, laughing, and Emma smiled so broadly Jonathan's chest ached. He realized then what the experts had failed to teach him. Love was not unscientific. Love was the foundation. Applied behavior analysis, structured therapy, all of it mattered. But without kindness, it was machinery without a heart. That evening, Jonathan sat with Clara in the library. The fire flickered, casting golden light across the rows of books. "I've been reading about ABA therapy," he said, sliding a journal across the table. "But I think you've been practicing something far deeper, something textbooks can't measure." Clara smiled shyly. "I only tried to see her, really see her, not as a case or a diagnosis, but as a girl who was hurting." Jonathan leaned back, studying her. "You didn't just heal her, Clara. You healed me, too." She lowered her gaze, the warmth of his words wrapping around her like a blanket. For weeks, she had dreamed of vindication, of being believed, but this quiet acknowledgement meant more than any public apology. Days turned into weeks, and Emma's progress astonished everyone. She began using single words: safe, home, love. Spoken softly, but surely. She hugged the staff who once doubted Clara, and they wept with relief. The mansion, once divided by suspicion, became united in gratitude. Then came the autumn afternoon that would change everything. Jonathan invited Clara and Emma to walk with him through Boston Common, the oldest park in America, where the trees blazed with orange and gold. They strolled past the frog pond, Emma holding Clara's hand while clutching a flashcard with a heart. Jonathan slowed beneath an elm tree, the crisp leaves crunching underfoot. He turned to Clara, his face uncharacteristically uncertain. "Clara, I've built my life on numbers, deals, legacies, but none of it ever brought me peace. You did. You and Emma." Clara's breath caught. Jonathan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it, revealing not the dazzling diamonds his wealth could easily buy, but a simple gold band. "Will you marry me? Not as staff, not as a guest in this house, but as the woman who saved my family and as Emma's mother." Tears filled Clara's eyes. She thought of Dorchester's cracked sidewalks, the whispers that once mocked her, the humiliation of being accused. And now, this. A family, not out of wealth or convenience, but out of love hard-earned through pain. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes, I will." Emma tugged her sleeve, pointing at the ring. "Mama," she said softly, and the word broke both Jonathan and Clara into tears. The wedding was not the kind society pages drooled over. There were no gilded ballrooms or guest lists of hundreds. Instead, it was held in the garden of the mansion, under a canopy of autumn leaves. The cook baked the cake, the gardener arranged flowers, The butler, now humbled, walked Clara down the aisle. Jonathan wore a simple suit. Clara wore a modest ivory dress. Emma stood proudly between them, holding a flashcard with the word family written in bright red crayon. When the vows were spoken, there were no dry eyes among the small gathering. What had once been a house of grief and suspicion had become a home of belonging. Later, as the guests drifted away, Jonathan pulled Clara close beneath the lanterns strung across the garden. "You've given me more than a second chance," he whispered. "You've given me a reason to believe in life again." Clara smiled through her tears. "We all saved each other." And above them, in the crisp Boston sky, the first winter star appeared, silent witness to the birth of a new family. Winter arrived in Boston with its usual insistence. Snow blanketed Beacon Hill, softening the edges of the cobblestone streets, muting the city's noise into a hush that felt almost reverent. Inside the Anderson mansion, warmth flickered from the grand fireplace, but it was not fire alone that gave the house its glow. It was life. Months had passed since Clara and Jonathan's wedding, months in which the mansion had been transformed from a mausoleum of grief into a home filled with the sounds of belonging. Staff who once whispered suspicion now hummed contentedly in their work, smiling as Emma bounded through the halls with laughter that had once seemed impossible. And then, the day came when the house grew even fuller. Clara lay in the upstairs bedroom, her hair damp with sweat, her hand gripping Jonathan's tightly. "Just one more push," the midwife urged. Jonathan's heart pounded harder than it ever had during any boardroom negotiation. He had faced billion-dollar risks with calm composure, but now he trembled as if the fate of the world rested in this moment. And then it happened, the cry of new life. A baby girl, her skin pink and wrinkled, her lungs strong with the wail of arrival. The midwife placed her gently in Clara's arms. Jonathan leaned close, tears blurring his vision. "She's perfect." Clara smiled through her exhaustion. "Meet your sister, Emma." The child approached cautiously, her small hands clutching a flashcard she had drawn herself, a stick-figure girl with a round head and tiny smile. She placed it gently beside the baby, then leaned down, her voice soft but clear. "Love." The word broke everyone present. Tears streamed down Jonathan's face as he pulled both his daughters into his arms, whispering, "Yes, Emma. Love." From that day forward, Emma became a big sister with a tenderness no therapy could have taught. She read stories to the baby in her halting voice, traced her tiny fingers with wonder, and sang lullabies Clara had once hummed to her. The child who had once lived in silence now filled the house with words that mattered most. Jonathan, too, had changed. He still attended meetings and managed investments, but he no longer measured life in quarterly returns. He measured it in mornings spent feeding his infant daughter, in evenings walking with Emma and Clara through the snow-dusted Boston Common, in the laughter that echoed across marble floors once filled with grief. But Jonathan's gratitude demanded more than private joy. He wanted to honor the woman who had saved them and the girl who had found her voice. And so, at a press conference held in the Boston Public Library's grand atrium, he announced the creation of the Clara Foundation for Children with Autism. "This foundation," Jonathan told the crowd of reporters and parents, his voice steady, "will ensure that no child is silenced by lack of resources, and no family is abandoned to despair. Therapy should not depend on wealth. Love should never be rationed." Clara stood beside him, their baby cradled in her arms, Emma clutching her dress. Cameras flashed, but for Jonathan, the only image that mattered was the one etched in his heart. His family, whole at last. Weeks later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, Clara found Emma sitting on the floor of the library with crayons spread around her. She was working intently, tongue poking from the corner of her mouth. "What are you drawing, sweetheart?" Clara asked, lowering herself beside her. Emma looked up, eyes shining, and held out the paper. On it was a house with tall windows, a man, a woman, a big sister, and a baby girl. Above them, in shaky letters, she had written, "We are the happiest family." Clara pressed a hand to her mouth, overcome. Jonathan entered just then, pausing in the doorway. When he saw the drawing, his chest tightened. He crossed the room, kneeling beside his daughter. "You're right," Jonathan whispered, his voice breaking. "We are." Clara leaned against him, the baby cooing in her arms, Emma nestled close. Outside, snow fell softly against the window panes, but inside, the Anderson mansion glowed with something no storm could extinguish. Love, hard-earned, love freely given, love that had turned grief into legacy. Home, at last. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this healing journey. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing so you'll never miss the next tale of hope, love, and redemption. Together, let's keep believing in second chances.